January 26, 1945, 14:30 hours. Holtzwihr, France. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, 19 years old from Kingston, Texas, stood in a frozen field outside a small French village and watched 6 German Panzer tanks advance toward his position with approximately 250 infantry soldiers following behind them. His company, Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, had started the morning with 128 men. German artillery, and the initial assault had reduced that number to 19. 19 men spread across a tree line, facing a full-strength German armored counterattack. The mathematics were simple and fatal. Murphy's position would be overrun in minutes. The only question was whether to retreat now and save the 19 men he had left, or hold long enough to delay the German advance and give other American units time to establish defensive positions. Murphy looked at the M10 tank destroyer sitting 40 yards in front of his position. The crew had abandoned it after German artillery shells struck near the fuel tanks, setting the vehicle on fire. Smoke was pouring from the engine compartment. The ammunition inside could cook off at any moment. No sane person would climb onto a burning vehicle filled with high explosives. But the M10's .50 caliber machine gun was still operational. And from that position, Murphy could see the entire German advance. He could call artillery fire onto targets. He could observe directly. He could hold the position long enough for his men to withdraw to safety. He turned to Staff Sergeant Walter Bruce, 28 years old from Alabama, his platoon sergeant. "Get the men back to the tree line," Murphy said. "I'm going forward." "Lieutenant, that tank destroyer's on fire," Bruce replied. "You'll be killed." "Then you'll be in command," Murphy said. "Get them back." "That's an order." Murphy walked across 40 yards of open ground, climbed onto the burning M10, and positioned himself behind the .50 caliber machine gun. For the next hour, he would fight alone against 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks, calling artillery fire onto his own position, while German machine guns, rifles, and tank cannons tried to kill him. This is the story of Audie Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of World War II, a man who killed an estimated 245 enemy soldiers in combat, earned 33 military awards, including the Medal of Honor, and spent the rest of his life fighting demons that no medal could defeat. A story of a boy who became a killer because his country needed one, who discovered he was extraordinarily good at war, and who paid for that talent with every peaceful moment that followed. This is a story of how a 19-year-old from the poorest county in Texas became a legend by refusing to die when every rational calculation said he should, and how surviving made him wonder, for the rest of his life, whether death might have been the easier choice. Audie Murphy was born on June 20th, 1925, in Kingston, Texas, a town so small it barely qualified as a town. He was the 7th of 12 children born to Emmett and Josie Murphy, sharecroppers who worked land they would never own for wages that never quite covered their debts. The Murphy family lived in poverty that most Americans, even during the Great Depression, couldn't comprehend. Their house had no electricity, no running water, and gaps in the walls that let the Texas wind blow through in winter. Audie's earliest memories were hunger, not missing a meal, but the constant, grinding awareness that there was never quite enough food for 12 children. When Audie was 10 years old, his father abandoned the family. Emmett Murphy simply left one day and never came back, leaving Josie to feed 12 children on a sharecropper's wage. When Audie was 16, his mother died of illness exacerbated by malnutrition and exhaustion. The Murphy children were split up, some went to an orphanage, some went to live with relatives. Audie, as one of the older boys, tried to keep the family together by working, picking cotton, hauling firewood, doing any job that would pay enough to buy food for his younger siblings. He failed. The economic reality was brutal and unavoidable. A 16-year-old with a 5th grade education couldn't earn enough to support multiple children. His younger siblings went to the orphanage. Audie blamed himself for that failure for the rest of his life. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Audie Murphy was 16 years old, weighed 112 pounds, and stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. He had never traveled more than 30 miles from Kingston. He had never seen a movie, never used a telephone, never been inside a building with electric lights. But he had been hunting in the Texas woods since he was 8 years old, shooting rabbits and squirrels to feed his family. He was an expert marksman with a rifle, not through training but through necessity. If he missed, his siblings went hungry, so he learned not to miss. On his 17th birthday, June 20th, 1942, Murphy tried to enlist in the Marines. The recruiter looked at him and said, "Son, you're too small." We need men who can carry a full pack. Murphy tried the paratroopers. Too small, they said. He tried the Navy. Too small. Finally, he tried the Army. The recruiter looked at his height and weight and said, "You're underweight for your height. Come back when you put on some pounds." Murphy's sister Corinne later described what happened next. Audie came home and ate everything he could find. He drank water until he thought he'd burst. He put rocks in his pockets. Then he went back to the recruiter and stood on that scale like his life depended on it. Because it did. He needed to weigh 115 pounds. He made it by 1 pound. On June 30th, 1942, Audie Murphy enlisted in the United States Army. He was 17 years old, 5'5", 113 pounds without the rocks in his pockets. The Army sent him to basic training at Camp Wolters, Texas. His drill instructors didn't know what to make of him. He was so small that the standard M1 Garand rifle looked oversized in his hands. His uniform hung loose on his frame. He looked like a child playing soldier. Then they took him to the rifle range. Murphy qualified as expert marksman on his first attempt, the highest rating possible. His groupings were so tight, the instructors thought he was cheating somehow, moving closer to the target between shots. They watched him shoot. He wasn't cheating. He was simply that good. Private Murphy's evaluation from basic training, preserved in his service record, noted, "Soldier is exceptionally small and appears physically unsuited for combat duty. However, his marksmanship scores are the highest this instructor has recorded in 12 years of service. Recommend assignment to training cadre or administrative duties." The Army ignored the recommendation and sent Murphy to North Africa with the 3rd Infantry Division in February 1943. He was 18 years old and had never seen the ocean before boarding the transport ship. The 3rd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Rock of the Marne for their performance in World War I, was one of the most experienced combat units in the Army. They had fought in Morocco and Algeria. They were preparing for the invasion of Sicily. They were hard men who had already seen combat, and they looked at the underweight teenager from Texas with skepticism bordering on contempt. Corporal Addie Tipton, 24 years old from Tennessee, was Murphy's squad leader. Years later, he described his first impression. "I thought, they sent me a boy. He looked like he should be in high school, not carrying a rifle. I figured he'd get himself killed in the first week." On July 10th, 1943, the 3rd Infantry Division landed in Sicily as part of Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Italy. Murphy's first combat action came near the town of Palermo, when his patrol encountered a German machine gun position. The machine gun opened fire. Murphy's squad dove for cover. Laddie Tipton yelled, "Somebody flank that gun!" Murphy didn't wait for orders. He moved laterally through an olive grove, working his way to a position where he could see the German machine gun crew. 2 Germans were operating the gun. A 3rd was feeding ammunition. Murphy fired 3 times. 3 Germans fell. The machine gun went silent. Tipton ran up to Murphy's position and found the teenager standing over 3 bodies, his rifle still raised. "You okay, Murphy?" Tipton asked. Murphy nodded but didn't speak. His hands were shaking. He had just killed 3 men. The reality of what he'd done, what he would have continued doing, was settling into his consciousness like a weight he would carry forever. "Good shooting," Tipton said, because he didn't know what else to say. At night, Murphy threw up behind a latrine. The next morning, he was back on patrol. He never threw up after killing again. The Sicily campaign lasted 38 days. Murphy's platoon was in near constant contact with German forces. In that time, Murphy killed at least 15 enemy soldiers that could be confirmed. He was promoted to private first class and then to corporal within 3 months. Extraordinarily fast advancement for a combat soldier. His reputation began to spread through the regiment. The kid from Texas, who looked like he should be in high school, was turning out to be one of the most effective killers in the division. But there was something else that his fellow soldiers noticed. Murphy never seemed to panic under fire. When German artillery started falling, experienced soldiers who had been in combat for months would hit the dirt and stay down. Murphy would assess the situation, identify targets, and continue firing. It wasn't courage in the traditional sense. It was something colder. Murphy later tried to explain it in his autobiography. "I discovered something about myself in Sicily. When people were shooting at me, I didn't feel fear the way other men did. I felt focused, like everything slowed down and became very clear. The fear came later when the shooting stopped." The 3rd Infantry Division invaded mainland Italy in September 1943 at Salerno. The fighting was brutal. German forces were dug into mountainous terrain that favored defense. Every village had to be taken house by house. Every hill had to be climbed under machine gun fire. Casualties were constant. Murphy's company commander, First Lieutenant James Compton, 32 years old from Georgia, began giving Murphy missions that other soldiers couldn't handle. I need someone to get close to that machine gun nest and take it out. Murphy would volunteer. He would succeed. On October 3rd, 1943, near the town of Eboli, Murphy's patrol was ambushed by a German squad. The opening burst of machine gun fire killed 2 Americans instantly and wounded 3 others. The remaining soldiers took cover. Murphy moved forward alone, using terrain to approach the German position from the flank. He killed 4 Germans with rifle fire, then moved to their machine gun position and turned the weapon on the remaining German forces. The ambush became a rout. Murphy's patrol suffered no additional casualties. Lieutenant Compton put Murphy in for a Bronze Star Medal. The citation read, "For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy." Private Murphy, on his own initiative, attacked a superior enemy force and eliminated their position, saving the lives of his fellow soldiers. Murphy was 19 years old. He had been in combat for 3 months. He had killed approximately 30 enemy soldiers, and he was discovering that he had a talent for war that both amazed and horrified him. By January 1944, Murphy had been promoted to staff sergeant and was leading his own squad. The 3rd Infantry Division was fighting near the Anzio beachhead, a brutal stalemate where German and Allied forces were locked in trench warfare that resembled World War I more than modern combat. It was at Anzio that Murphy learned the cost of leadership. On January 24th, 1944, his squad was assigned to hold a position against a German counterattack. Murphy positioned his men in a farmhouse with good fields of fire. The Germans attacked with approximately 50 infantry, supported by machine guns. Murphy's squad held the position for 6 hours, repelling multiple assaults. But Private Jacob Harris, 20 years old from Ohio, was hit by a rifle round that struck him in the chest. He died within minutes despite Murphy's attempts to stop the bleeding with field dressings. Murphy blamed himself. Years later, he would tell his wife that he could remember every man who died under his command, their names, their ages, how they died. Harris was the first. There would be others. The Italian campaign continued to the spring of 1944. Murphy earned a Silver Star for destroying a German tank with rifle grenades near Cisterna. He earned his first Distinguished Service Cross for single-handedly attacking a German position near Anzio that had pinned down 2 American companies. The citation for the Distinguished Service Cross provides details that Murphy himself never discussed publicly. Staff Sergeant Murphy advanced alone across 200 yards of open ground under heavy machine gun and rifle fire. He destroyed 2 machine gun positions with hand grenades, killed 5 enemy soldiers with rifle fire, and forced the surrender of 15 others. His actions eliminated the enemy position and allowed 2 companies to advance 200 yards across open ground. Machine gun fire. Alone, Murphy's company commander asked him afterward, "What were you thinking, charging across that field?" Murphy's response, recorded in the after-action report, "I was thinking that if I didn't, we'd be pinned down all day and more men would die." It was pure Murphy logic. The most dangerous course of action was also the one that would save the most lives. He began to develop a reputation for suicidal courage that was actually mathematical calculation. He was willing to risk one life, his own, to save multiple lives, his men's. By June 1944, Murphy had been in combat for nearly a year. He had been promoted to 2nd lieutenant, a battlefield commission that recognized his leadership and combat effectiveness. He had earned multiple decorations. He had killed approximately 50 enemy soldiers, and he had stopped sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night. When he did sleep, he had nightmares about the men he had killed and the men who had died under his command. He learned to function on chronic sleep deprivation. It was a skill he would need for the next 40 years. On August 15, 1944, Murphy and the 3rd Infantry Division participated in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. The division landed near Saint-Tropez and began fighting north through the Rhone Valley toward Germany. The fighting in France was different from Italy. The Germans were retreating, but they were fighting delaying actions at every river, every village, every defensive position. The 3rd Infantry Division advanced hundreds of miles in a few months, but paid for every mile with casualties. Murphy's leadership style was direct and effective. He never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When a position needed to be taken, he led the assault. When someone needed a volunteer for a dangerous mission, he volunteered first. His men respected him because he brought them through engagements with fewer casualties than other platoons. His superiors respected him because he completed missions that other officers said were impossible. But Murphy was changing in ways that worried the men who knew him best. Laddie Tipton, who had been with Murphy since Sicily, later described it. The kid who threw up after his first kill was gone. The Audie we saw in France was colder. He did his job with his frightening efficiency. He'd kill Germans and then make a joke about it. We thought he was handling combat better than the rest of us. We didn't realize he was handling it worse. He just learned to hide it. In October 1944, Murphy's platoon was fighting near the town of Clury in the Vosges Mountains. German forces had established a defensive line on high ground overlooking the American advance. Murphy's company was assigned to take the position. The attack stalled under heavy machine gun fire. Murphy's company commander was wounded. Murphy took command and reorganized the assault. He personally destroyed 3 machine gun positions, killed at least 9 Germans, and led his men to the objective. For this action, Murphy received a second Distinguished Service Cross. The citation noted, Lieutenant Murphy's extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for his personal safety inspired his men to overcome determined enemy resistance. Complete disregard for his personal safety was military language for suicidal bravery. Murphy's fellow officers were beginning to worry that he was actively seeking death in combat, that he concluded his own life was less valuable than completing the mission. They were right to worry. Murphy had stopped writing letters home. He had given away most of his personal possessions. He had told multiple soldiers that he didn't expect to survive the war. These were classic warning signs of a soldier who had given up on having a future. But Murphy continued fighting with terrifying effectiveness. By January 1945, he had been in combat for 18 months. He had killed approximately 90 enemy soldiers. He had earned multiple decorations for valor. He was 20 years old and commanded a company of infantry. And he was about to face the moment that would define his legend and haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. The village of Holtzwihr, France, sits in the Colmar Pocket, a salient of German-held territory west of the Rhine River. In January 1945, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division was tasked with eliminating the pocket and pushing German forces back across the Rhine. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, arrived outside Holtzwihr on January 25, 1945. Lieutenant Audie Murphy was commanding the company, a battlefield promotion after the previous commander had been wounded. At 19 years old, Murphy was one of the youngest company commanders in the Army. The tactical situation was straightforward. Holtzwihr sat at a crossroads. Controlling the village meant controlling German supply lines in the pocket. The Germans knew this. They had reinforced Holtzwihr with a full infantry company, tank support, and artillery. Murphy's orders were to take the village. His company numbered 128 men, understrength after weeks of continuous combat. They had no tank support. Their closest artillery support was 2 miles away. On the morning of January 26, Murphy positioned his company in a tree line south of Holtzwihr. The plan was to advance across open ground, approximately 300 yards of frozen fields, and assault the village. It was a terrible plan, but there was no alternative. The terrain offered no concealment and no cover. At 6 o'clock hours, Murphy's company began the advance. They made it approximately 100 yards before German artillery began falling. The first salvo killed 4 men instantly and wounded a dozen others. Murphy called for his men to take cover and radioed for American artillery support to suppress the German guns. For the next 6 hours, Company B was pinned down in an open field while German artillery methodically worked over their positions. Murphy spent those hours crawling from position to position, redistributing ammunition, treating wounded soldiers, and calling fire missions to artillery. By 1300 hours, Company B had lost 40 men to artillery fire without even making contact with German infantry. Murphy made the decision to withdraw his remaining forces to the tree line and wait for darkness before attempting another assault. The withdrawal began at 1330 hours. German observers spotted the movement and called in more artillery. Another 15 men were hit during the withdrawal. Murphy stayed on the field, helping wounded soldiers back to the tree line until he was the last American in the open. By 1400 hours, Company B had withdrawn to their starting position. Murphy counted heads. 19 men still combat effective. He had started the day with 128. In 8 hours, he had lost over 80% of his command without taking the objective. At 1420 hours, German forces counterattacked. 6 Panzer tanks, a mix of Mark IVs and Panthers, emerged from Holtzwihr with approximately 250 infantry soldiers following behind them. It was a company-strength assault designed to push the Americans completely out of the area. Murphy's 19 men were spread along a tree line that offered minimal cover. They had no anti-tank weapons. Their closest reinforcements were a mile away. The German tanks would reach their position in 5 minutes. Murphy Radio Battalion Headquarters. We have 6 tanks and over 200 infantry advancing on our position. Request immediate tank support and artillery fire mission. The response: no tanks available your sector. Artillery standing by for fire mission. Give me coordinates. Murphy looked at the advancing Germans. In a few minutes, they would overrun his position. His men would be killed or captured. The crossroads would remain in German hands. The entire operation would fail. 40 yards in front of the tree line sat an M10 tank destroyer, a lightly armored vehicle mounting a 76mm gun. The crew had abandoned it earlier after a near miss from German artillery set the engine compartment on fire. The vehicle was burning, smoke pouring from the rear deck. The ammunition stored inside could detonate at any moment, but the M10's .50 caliber machine gun was still mounted on the turret ring, and from that position, Murphy could see the entire German advance. He could direct artillery fire onto targets he could observe directly. Staff Sergeant Walter Bruce saw Murphy staring at the burning tank destroyer. "Lieutenant, you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Get the men ready to withdraw," Murphy said. "Fall back to the secondary position when I give the word." "That tank's on fire," Bruce protested. "You'll be killed. Then you're in command. Get them out." Murphy walked across 40 yards of open ground while German tanks fired at him. He climbed onto the burning M10 tank destroyer. He positioned himself behind the .50 caliber machine gun. He picked up the radio handset, connected to his artillery forward observer net. At 14:30 hours, Audie Murphy began fighting alone against 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks. The .50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun is one of the most effective infantry weapons ever designed. It fires around the size of a man's finger at 2,900 feet per second. It can penetrate light armor. It can kill at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. In the hands of an expert marksman, it is devastatingly effective. Murphy was an expert marksman. The German infantry were advancing in loose formation approximately 100 yards ahead of their tanks. Murphy opened fire on the infantry. The .50 caliber rounds tore through the German soldiers. Men fell. The advance hesitated. German squad leaders began shouting orders, trying to reorganize the assault. Murphy identified them by their actions and shot them. Leaderless squads broke and ran for cover. The German tanks continued advancing, their commanders apparently believing that one man on a burning vehicle couldn't possibly hold up an armored assault. They were wrong. Murphy got on the radio to his artillery forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weisfennig, positioned a mile away with access to a battalion of 105mm howitzers. "Weiss, this is Murphy. Fire mission. Coordinates." Murphy read off the position of the advancing German forces. "That's danger close," Weisfennig responded. "You're calling artillery practically on top of your own position." "I know where I am," Murphy replied. "Fire for effect." 30 seconds later, American artillery shells began falling on the Germans. Murphy adjusted fire, walking the artillery barrage closer to his own position. Shells were landing within 50 yards of the burning M10. Shrapnel was hitting the vehicle. Murphy kept firing the machine gun. The German tank stopped advancing and began firing at the M10 with their main guns and machine guns. A Panther tank at 300 yards fired in 75mm high explosive shell that struck the ground 10 feet from the M10. The concussion knocked Murphy down. He got back up and kept firing. German rifle and machine gun fire was hitting the M10 continuously. The vehicle was still burning. Smoke made it difficult to see. Murphy's uniform caught fire from embers. He beat out the flames and kept firing. For 60 minutes, Murphy fought alone. His men in the tree line watched in disbelief as he held off an entire German company single-handedly. Every time the Germans tried to advance, Murphy cut them down with machine gun fire. Every time they took cover, he called artillery fire onto their positions. The Germans tried to flank the M10. Murphy spotted the movement and shifted his fire to the flanking squad. They went to ground and didn't advance further. The ammunition in the burning M10 began to cook off. Small arms rounds and machine gun ammunition were detonating inside the vehicle. Murphy could feel the heat through his boots. The vehicle could explode completely at any moment. He kept fighting. At approximately 15-20 hours, Murphy's legs were hit by German machine gun fire. 2 rounds struck him in the right leg. He collapsed behind a .50 caliber gun. For 30 seconds, he couldn't stand. The pain was extraordinary. He pulled himself upright using the machine gun mount and continued firing. The German assault was faltering. They had lost approximately 50 men killed and twice that number wounded. Their infantry wouldn't advance into the artillery fire. Their tanks couldn't reach the American tree line. Without infantry support, the attack was stalling. At 15:30 hours, 60 minutes after Murphy climbed onto the burning M10, the Germans began to withdraw. Their tanks reversed course. Their infantry pulled back to Holtzwihr under covering fire. Murphy emptied the last belt of ammunition from the .50 caliber machine gun at the retreating Germans. Then he climbed down from the M10. His wounded legs barely supported his weight and limped back to the tree line. His men were silent. What they had just witnessed didn't seem possible. One man had held off a company-strength attack for an hour. One man on a burning vehicle, calling artillery fire onto his own position, had stopped 6 tanks. Staff Sergeant Bruce helped Murphy to a medic. "Lieutenant, you're hit bad." "I'm fine," Murphy said. Then he collapsed. The medic examined Murphy's legs. Both wounds were serious, but not life-threatening. The bullets had passed through muscle tissue without hitting bone or major blood vessels. Murphy was evacuated to a field hospital. The final count from the Holtzwihr engagement. German forces lost approximately 50 soldiers killed and an estimated 100 wounded. Murphy's company lost 7 more men during the German assault, all from tank and artillery fire before Murphy climbed onto the M10. After Murphy engaged the Germans, his company suffered no additional casualties. Murphy had saved 19 men by drawing all German fire onto himself. He had stopped the company-strength assault single-handedly. He had done it while wounded, on a burning vehicle filled with explosives, calling artillery fire that was landing close enough to kill him. It was the most extraordinary individual combat action of World War II. The Army would award Murphy the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, for his actions at Holtzwihr. But Murphy himself would struggle to explain what he had done. In his autobiography, published years later, he wrote simply, "I don't remember much about the hour on the tank destroyer. I remember being angry. I remember thinking that the Germans were going to kill the men I was responsible for. I remember deciding that I wouldn't let that happen. After that, it's fragments, the noise, the heat, the shock of being hit, but mostly just focus, like nothing else mattered except keeping my men alive." The Medal of Honor citation provides the official version. Second Lieutenant Audie L. Murphy, Company B, 15th Infantry, distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty on January 26, 1945. Near Holtzwihr, France, his directing of artillery fire wiped out many of the enemy. It was largely because of Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground that saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction. What the citation doesn't mention is that Murphy had nightmares about Holtzwihr for the rest of his life. He dreamed about the Germans he killed. He dreamed about the M10 exploding with him on it. He dreamed about failing, about the Germans overrunning his position and killing his men. The hour on the burning tank destroyer made Audie Murphy a legend. It also broke something in him that would never fully heal. Audie Murphy spent 3 weeks recovering from his leg wounds before returning to duty in February 1945. By that time, his company had been pulled out of the line for rest and refitting. Murphy was promoted to first lieutenant and given command of a new company. He didn't want the promotion. Years later, he told a friend, "After Holtzwihr, I didn't want to be responsible for anyone else. I'd seen too many men die. I just wanted to be left alone to do my job and maybe die doing it, because dying seemed easier than going home with all those memories." But the Army needed experienced combat leaders, and Murphy was one of the best. He remained in command through the final months of the war, the drive into Germany, the crossing of the Rhine, the final collapse of German resistance in May 1945. By V-Day, Murphy had been in combat for over 2 years. He had killed an estimated 245 enemy soldiers, a number that made him one of the most lethal individual combatants in American military history. He had earned 33 military decorations, including Medal of Honor Distinguished Service Cross, 2, Silver Star, 2, Legion of Merit Bronze Star, 2, Purple Heart 3. He was the most decorated American soldier of World War II. He was 20 years old, and he had no idea how to stop being a soldier. Murphy returned to the United States in June 1945. The Army wanted to use him for publicity, war bond drives, recruiting events, public appearances. He was a genuine American hero at a time when the country desperately wanted heroes. But Murphy discovered something terrifying. He couldn't sleep in America. In combat, he had learned to sleep lightly, waking at the slightest sound. His body had adapted to constant danger. Now, in the safety of a hotel room in San Antonio, Texas, every car door slamming outside sounded like artillery. Every door closing was a rifle shot. He would wake up reaching for weapons that weren't there, his heart racing, sweat soaking through his sheets. He started sleeping with a loaded .45 pistol under his pillow. It made him feel safer. It also made him dangerous. His first serious relationship after the war nearly ended in tragedy. Murphy was staying with a girlfriend in San Antonio when he had a nightmare about Holtzwihr. He woke up with his hands around her throat. Thinking she was a German soldier, she screamed. Murphy snapped back to reality and released her. She fled the apartment. Murphy sat on the floor and cried for the first time since his mother's death. He checked himself into a VA hospital and told the doctors, "Something is wrong with me. I can't sleep. I have nightmares. I'm dangerous to the people around me." The doctors diagnosed him with nervous exhaustion and battle fatigue, terms that would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. But in 1945, the treatment options were limited. The doctors prescribed sleeping pills and told Murphy to try to relax and forget about the war. Murphy couldn't forget about the war. The war was everything. It defined him. It had made him into something extraordinary and something broken. In 1946, Murphy was approached by Hollywood. Actor James Cagney had read about Murphy's war record and thought his story would make compelling film. Cagney invited Murphy to Los Angeles and offered to help him get into acting. Murphy had no acting experience. He had barely finished 5th grade. He had no connections in Hollywood beyond Cagney's offer. But he had nothing else. No job prospects, no education, no skills beyond killing people efficiently. He moved to Los Angeles and began taking acting lessons. His first attempts were disasters. Directors found him stiff and uncomfortable on camera. His thick Texas accent was nearly incomprehensible. He had no natural charisma or presence when he wasn't holding a weapon. But Murphy persisted with the same determination he had shown in combat. He studied acting. He worked on his accent. He took any role offered, no matter how small, and slowly he improved. His breakthrough came in 1949 with the film Bad Boy, where Murphy played a troubled teenager. Critics noted that Murphy brought an authentic darkness to the role, a quality that came from genuine trauma rather than acting technique. In 1955, Murphy starred in To Hell and Back, a film adaptation of his own autobiography. He played himself, recreating his combat experiences for the camera. The film was a commercial success and made Murphy a genuine movie star. But filming To Hell and Back was psychological torture. Murphy had to relive Holtzwihr for cameras, climbing onto a mock-up of the M10 tank destroyer, firing blank ammunition at actors playing German soldiers, recreating the most traumatic hour of his life over and over until the director was satisfied with the takes. He started drinking heavily during filming. He couldn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. His nightmares intensified. He told the director, "Every time I close my eyes, I see the faces of the men I killed. I remember their expressions when they died. I can't make it stop." The director offered to shut down production. Murphy refused. "No, we finished this. Maybe telling the story will help. Maybe people need to know what war actually costs." The film doesn't show that cost. To Hell and Back is a relatively sanitized version of Murphy's combat experiences. The real horrors, the fear, the trauma, the psychological damage, are absent. It's a heroic war film, not a documentary about what war does to the human mind. Murphy knew this. In later interviews, he would blunt, "The movie shows me killing Germans. It doesn't show me waking up screaming 20 years later because I can still see their faces. That's the part of war nobody wants to watch." Murphy's post-war life became a pattern of success and self-destruction. He made over 40 films between 1948 and 1969. He earned millions of dollars. He married twice. His first marriage ended in divorce after 3 years when his wife couldn't handle his nightmares and violent episodes. His second marriage, to Pamela Archer in 1951, lasted until his death. Pamela later described life with Murphy. He was two different people. During the day, he was charming, generous, hardworking. At night, he was tortured. He would wake up fighting invisible enemies. He would sometimes mistake me for a German soldier and attack me before fully waking. I learned to sleep in another room. It was safer. Murphy developed a severe addiction to sleeping pills. The medication prescribed to help him sleep became the only way he could sleep at all. At his peak, he was taking powerful sedatives every night just to get 3 or 4 hours of rest. In 1968, Murphy decided to quit sleeping pills cold turkey. He locked himself in a motel room for a week and went to withdrawal without medical supervision. It nearly killed him. He experienced hallucinations, seizures, and psychological breaks so severe that he contemplated suicide. But he survived, and afterward, he began speaking publicly about what would later be recognized as PTSD. He testified before Congress about the inadequate treatment for combat veterans. He advocated for better mental health services for soldiers returning from Vietnam. He was one of the first prominent American veterans to publicly acknowledge that war causes psychological damage that doesn't heal with time. His testimony before Congress in 1969 was remarkably blunt. I have nightmares about the men I killed. I can't sleep without medication. I can't be around loud noises without having flashbacks. I've been home from the war for 24 years, and I'm still fighting it every single day. If this is what happens to the most decorated soldier in American history, what do you think is happening to the thousands of other veterans who don't have my resources or support system? Murphy's advocacy helped establish some of the first PTSD treatment programs for Vietnam veterans. He used his fame to shine a light on an issue that the military and the VA had been ignoring for decades. But he couldn't fix himself. The damage was too deep. On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy was traveling on a private plane from Atlanta to Martinsville, Virginia, for a business meeting. The plane encountered bad weather near Roanoke, Virginia. The pilot attempted to navigate through a storm system and became disoriented. At approximately 3 p.m., the plane crashed into Brush Mountain, killing all 6 people aboard. Audie Murphy was 45 years old. He had survived 2 years of combat in World War II, fought in 9 major campaigns, been wounded 3 times, killed 245 enemy soldiers, earned 33 military decorations, and spent 26 years fighting psychological demons that no metal could defeat. The crash site was inaccessible by road. Recovery teams had to hike through mountain wilderness to reach the wreckage. They found Murphy's body still strapped into his seat. In his pocket was a St. Christopher medal, patron saint of travelers, that had been given to him by a French woman during the war. Murphy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His funeral was attended by thousands of people, including hundreds of veterans who had served under his command. The gravestone is simple. His name, his rank, his dates of birth and death, and a list of his major decorations. The gravestone doesn't mention that Murphy died still fighting the war. It doesn't mention the nightmares, the addiction, the decades of suffering. It presents a heroic version of Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier, the American legend. But Murphy himself would have wanted people to know the complete truth. In one of his last interviews, conducted a few months before his death, he was asked, "Do you regret your service in World War II?" His answer, "I don't regret fighting. We had to stop Hitler. But I regret what the fighting did to me and to every other combat soldier. We won the war, but we lost something of ourselves in the process. I killed 245 men. That's not a record I'm proud of. That's 245 human beings who had families, who had futures, who I ended because war demanded it. And I paid for every one of those deaths with nightmares and guilt and addiction and pain that never goes away. So when people thank me for my service, I appreciate it. But what I really want to understand is that war isn't glorious. War isn't heroic. War is young men killing other young men because old men made decisions that led to conflict. And the survivors, we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out how to live with what we did. The medal they gave me says, above and beyond the call of duty. But the real story of Holtzwihr isn't about heroism. It's about a 19-year-old who was so damaged by war that climbing onto a burning tank destroyer to kill more people seemed like a reasonable thing to do. That's not courage. That's trauma expressing itself as violence. And I've been dealing with the consequences ever since. Audie Murphy's grave at Arlington National Cemetery is the second most visited grave site in the cemetery after President John F. Kennedy's. Thousands of people visit every year to pay respects to the most decorated American soldier of World War II. But the visitors are seeing only part of the story. They're seeing the medals, the heroism, the legend, They're not seeing the man who couldn't sleep, who fought addiction for 26 years, who struggled every single day with memories that wouldn't fade. The military analyzed Murphy's combat record extensively after the war. Tactical analysts studied Holtzwihr as an example of individual combat effectiveness. The Army used Murphy's actions as training material for officer candidates. How one soldier with superior position and marksmanship can hold off a superior force. But those analyses missed the point. Holtzwihr wasn't a tactical victory. It was a desperate gamble by a traumatized 20-year-old who had already decided his life was worth less than his men's lives. Murphy survived by chance. Any one of the hundreds of German rounds fired at him could have been fatal. The tank destroyer could have exploded at any moment. The artillery he called onto his own position could have killed him. He won at Holtzwihr because he was willing to die there. And in a sense, part of him did die there. The Audie Murphy who climbed off that tank destroyer was fundamentally different from the farm boy who had enlisted 3 years earlier. The post-war years proved that Murphy's greatest battle wasn't against German soldiers. It was against the memories of what he had done and what had been done to him. It was a battle he fought with courage and determination, testifying before Congress, speaking publicly about PTSD, helping other veterans. But it was a battle he ultimately couldn't win. His advocacy, however, had lasting impact. The VA programs he helped establish have treated hundreds of thousands of veterans. His willingness to speak openly about psychological trauma helped reduce the stigma around mental health issues in the military. His testimony contributed to the eventual official recognition of PTSD as a legitimate medical condition. In 2000, 29 years after his death, the Audie Murphy Memorial VA Hospital opened in San Antonio, Texas, appropriate recognition for a man who spent his final years trying to help other veterans receive the mental health treatment he wished he had received decades earlier. The French government named a street in Holtzwihr Rue Audie Murphy in his honor. A monument stands near the spot where the M10 tank destroyer sat on January 26, 1945. The monument's inscription reads, "On this field, one American soldier held against impossible odds. His courage saved many lives. His sacrifice reminds us that freedom is never free." But the most honest memorial to Audie Murphy might be his own words from his autobiography, published in 1949. "They're giving me a medal for killing men. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a killer. But if my killing saved my men's lives, then maybe it was worth it. I don't know. I'll probably never know. I just know that I did what I had to do, and I've paid for it every day since." That's the real legacy of Audie Murphy. Not the medals, not the Hollywood career, not the legend of Tiny Texan, who became a giant of war. The real legacy is a reminder that every act of combat heroism comes with a cost paid not on the battlefield, but in the decades that follow, in the nightmares and the trauma, and the struggle to find peace after war. Murphy's story is ultimately about two types of courage. The courage to fight when survival seems impossible, and the courage to keep living when surviving seems harder than dying would have been. He demonstrated both. The Medal of Honor recognized the first. History should remember the second. On Brush Mountain in Virginia, a small memorial marks the spot where Audie Murphy's plane crashed. Visitors sometimes leave flowers. Veterans leave medals. Some leave notes thanking Murphy for his service. But the most appropriate tribute might be the one left by a Vietnam veteran in 2010. "Thank you for trying to help us when we came home. Thank you for telling the truth about what war costs. Rest in peace, Lieutenant. You've done enough." Audie Murphy did more than enough. He fought a war he didn't start, survived battles he shouldn't have survived, saved lives at the cost of his own peace, and spent his remaining years trying to help others avoid his fate. The war ended in 1945. For Audie Murphy, it never really ended at all. He simply fought on different terrain, against different enemies, with wounds that never fully healed. The most decorated American soldier of World War II was also one of its longest-suffering casualties. That paradox defines his legacy. Extraordinary courage and extraordinary trauma, heroism and horror, survival and suffering, all contained in one small man from Texas who became a giant by refusing to quit, even when quitting might be the kindest thing he could have done for himself. 79 years after Holtzwihr, people still debate whether Murphy's actions were heroic or suicidal, whether he saved lives or simply survived by luck, whether the Medal of Honor recognizes courage or compensates for trauma. Murphy himself never resolved those questions. He lived with the ambiguity, the guilt, the nightmares, and the memories. He did his duty. He paid the price. And he spent his final years trying to ensure that future generations of soldiers wouldn't have to pay the same price alone. Without help, without recognition that psychological wounds are as real as physical ones, that might be his greatest accomplishment. Not the hour on the burning tank destroyer, but the decade spent fighting to ensure that other veterans could find the help he wished he had found. Audie Murphy gave his country everything he had. His country gave him medals. What he really needed was healing. He never quite found it, but he made sure to point the way for those who came after. The tiny Texan who stood alone against impossible odds didn't just fight Germans on a frozen field in France. He fought demons in his own mind for 26 years. He fought ignorance about combat trauma. He fought stigma around mental health. He fought until the day he died. That's the complete story of Audie Murphy, warrior, survivor, advocate, and casualty of a war that never truly ended for those who fought it. Rest in peace, Lieutenant. You earned it.